I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There, in my own son's handwriting, were detailed architectural plans for renovating my house, plans that didn't include a bedroom for me anywhere. But that wasn't even the worst part. Attached to those blueprints was a real estate valuation, a letter from a contractor, and what looked like a timeline. A timeline that started with Mom moves to Sunset Manor and ended with house renovation complete for resale. My hands trembled as I held those papers. 37 years I'd lived in this house. 37 years of memories of raising my children, of building a life. And my son David, my own flesh and blood, was planning to ship me off to a nursing home so he could flip my house for profit. I sat down hard in his desk chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. The folder was labeled Future Planning in David's neat handwriting, and it had been tucked away in the very back of his file cabinet. I'd only found it because I was looking for the warranty information for his printer. He'd asked me to fix it while he was at work, said the papers were somewhere in the desk area. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, still taking care of my 42-year-old son, still fixing his problems, and he was secretly plotting to dispose of me like an inconvenient piece of furniture. But let me back up. Let me tell you how I got to this moment, sitting in my son's study, holding papers that would change everything between us forever. My name is Martha, and I'm 73 years old. I know what you're thinking. Another story about an ungrateful child and a naive parent. But this isn't that simple. This is about 37 years of sacrifice, of putting my children first, of building something beautiful only to discover that one of those children saw it all as nothing more than a real estate opportunity. I moved into this house in 1987 with my late husband Robert. David was 5 then, and his sister Caroline was 8. It was our dream home. A beautiful 3-bedroom colonial with original hardwood floors, a wraparound porch, and a garden that became my sanctuary. Robert and I poured our hearts into that house. We painted every room, refinished those floors ourselves, and spent countless weekends creating the kind of home where our children could grow up feeling safe and loved. When Robert passed away 8 years ago, the house became more than just my home. It became my connection to him, to our life together, to everything we'd built. But it also became something else entirely to my children. I just didn't realize it at the time. David had always been my responsible child, the one who worried about my future. After his father's funeral, he'd started having conversations about planning ahead and making sure Mom is taken care of. I thought it was sweet. I thought it showed how much he cared about me. "Mom, you don't have to make any decisions now," he'd said, just a week after we buried his father. "But maybe we should start thinking about what happens when this big house becomes too much for you." I'd brushed him off. At 65, I was hardly ready for assisted living. I was still gardening, still cooking Sunday dinners for the family, still maintaining the house just fine on my own. But David kept bringing it up, gently, carefully, always framed as concern for my well-being. "I just worry about you here alone, Mom. What if you fell? What if something happened?" Caroline, my daughter, lived across the country in Seattle with her own family. She called regularly but wasn't part of these conversations. It was just David, my local son, my caretaker, expressing what seemed like genuine love and concern. After Robert died, David started coming by more often. He'd mow the lawn without being asked, fix little things around the house, check on me daily. I was grateful. I thought I was blessed to have such a devoted son. He even insisted on having a key made, just in case of emergencies. "Mom, I sleep better knowing I can get to you if you need help," he'd said. Looking back now, I realized that David's increased presence wasn't about taking care of me, it was about taking inventory. About 2 years after Robert's death, David started bringing up specific concerns about the house. The heating system was getting old. The roof might need attention soon. The property taxes were going up every year. "Mom, I've been doing some research," he said one Sunday after dinner. "Do you know what houses like this are going for in the neighborhood now?" I didn't, and I told him I didn't care. This wasn't just a house to me, it was home. I know, he'd said, patting my hand. "I'm not saying you should sell. I'm just saying it's good to know what you have. For planning purposes." Planning purposes. I should have paid more attention to that phrase. David worked as an accountant, and he had what he called a practical mind. He was always talking about investments, equity, and maximizing assets. Sometimes I felt like he spoke a different language than I did. Where I saw the kitchen where I'd made thousands of family meals, David seemed to see square footage and potential value. But he was subtle about it, always framing everything in terms of my comfort and security. He'd never directly suggested I should leave the house. Instead, he'd plant little seeds of doubt. Mom, Mrs. Henderson next door is selling because she says the maintenance is getting to be too much for her. Did you see that article about seniors who age in place? There are some real challenges to consider. That new assisted living place on Maple Street looks really nice. Maybe we should take a tour sometime just to see what's available. I started to feel like David was preparing me for something, but I assumed he was just being thorough responsible. After all, he was the one who helped me with my taxes every year, who reviewed my insurance policies, who made sure all my important papers were in order. He was taking care of me, wasn't he? About 6 months ago, David's visits became even more frequent. He'd stop by after work, ostensibly to check on me, but I noticed he'd spend time walking around the house, almost like he was assessing it. He'd comment on things that needed repair or updating. Mom, the bathroom upstairs really needs work. Those tiles are original, aren't they? And the plumbing. The kitchen could use a refresh. These cabinets are pretty dated now. Have you thought about what you want to do with all of Dad's tools in the basement? Some of them are actually worth quite a bit. I started to feel defensive about my own home. Every visit from David became a list of its shortcomings, its needs, its imperfections. He made me see problems where I'd only seen character before. But the real change happened 3 months ago when David announced he was getting divorced. Sarah and I are separating, he told me over coffee in my kitchen. We're going to try to keep things amicable for the kids' sake, but the financials are going to be tight for a while. My heart broke for him. David had been married for 15 years, and while I'd sensed some tension recently, I hadn't realized things were that bad. Sarah was a good woman, and their 2 children, my grandchildren, meant the world to me. What can I do to help? I asked. Nothing, Mom. We'll figure it out. Well, divorce is expensive. And with child support and having to maintain 2 households, it's going to be challenging. I offered to help financially. I had Robert's life insurance money in my savings, but David refused. Absolutely not, Mom. That money is for your care, for your future. I won't touch it. At the time, I thought his refusal showed integrity. Now I realize he had other plans for accessing my resources. After David moved out of his marital home and into a small apartment, he started spending even more time at my house. Most evenings he'd come by after work. Weekends he'd arrive early and stay late. He said the apartment was depressing and being at my house reminded him of happier times. I was glad for the company. The house did feel big and quiet with just me in it, and David's presence made it feel more alive. He'd often work on his laptop at the kitchen table while I watched television or read. Sometimes he'd take phone calls in Robert's old study, which I'd barely used since my husband's death. Hope you don't mind, Mom. The connection is better in there, and it's quieter for work calls. Of course I didn't mind. I was happy that David felt at home in my house. I was happy that Robert's study was being used again instead of sitting empty like a shrine. What I didn't know was that David had been using that study for much more than work calls. 2 weeks ago, David's printer stopped working. He'd been complaining about it for days. Apparently he needed to print some important documents for his divorce proceedings, and his cheap apartment printer kept jamming. Mom, would it be okay if I brought my printer over here temporarily? Just until I can get a new one. Of course, I said. You can set it up in the study. So David brought over his printer and set up what he called a temporary office in Robert's study. He moved in a filing cabinet, brought over some of his important papers, and essentially created a workspace for handling his divorce paperwork. This is so much better than trying to work in that cramped apartment, he said. I really appreciate this, Mom. Yesterday morning, David left for work in a hurry. He'd gotten an early call about some emergency at his office and rushed out without his usual coffee and chat. Around noon he called me. Mom, I hate to ask, but could you try to get my printer working? I need to print something important for my lawyer, and I won't be able to get over there until late tonight. Of course, I said. What seems to be wrong with it? It keeps saying there's a paper jam, but I can't find it. The manual might be in one of the desk drawers or maybe in the filing cabinet. If you could just take a look. So that's how I found myself in David's temporary office yesterday afternoon, looking for a printer manual. I checked the desk drawers first, nothing but pens, paper clips, and some old bills. Then I moved to the filing cabinet. The first drawer was full of David's divorce paperwork, legal documents, financial statements, correspondence with lawyers. I felt bad even glimpsing these personal papers, but I was looking for that manual. The second drawer seemed to contain more of the same, but as I pushed folders aside, my hand hit something wedged in the very back. A folder that had gotten stuck behind the others. I pulled it out to make sure I wasn't missing the manual behind it. That's when I saw the label, Future Planning. I almost put it back immediately. This was David's private business and I had no right to look. But something about the phrase future planning, in the context of David's recent behavior, made me pause. All those comments about the house, about planning ahead, about my future care. I opened the folder. The first document I saw was a professional real estate evaluation of my house. My house, dated just 6 weeks ago. According to the appraiser, my home was worth $90,000 in its current condition, with a potential value of $0.2 million after renovations. Below that was a letter from a contractor, outlining renovation costs and timelines for what he called a complete modernization project. The estimate was $80,000, with a projected completion time of 4 months. But it was the third document that made my blood run cold. Architectural plans. Professional blueprints showing a complete redesign of my house's interior. The 3-bedroom layout I knew and loved was gone, replaced by an open concept design with 2 larger bedrooms, a massive master suite, and what looked like a home office. There was no bedroom marked for me anywhere in these plans. I sat down hard, my heart pounding. Attached to the blueprints was a handwritten timeline in David's writing. Phase 1, Month 1, Mom transitions to Sunset Manor. Phase 2, Months 1 to 4, complete renovation. Phase 3, Month 5, list house for sale. Phase 4, Month 6, closing and profit distribution. At the bottom of the timeline, David had written, projected net profit after renovation costs and mom's care expenses, 00000-500, 000. I stared at those numbers until they blurred. My son had reduced my entire life, my home, my independence to a profit margin. But there was more. Much more. The next document was a research printout about Sunset Manor, the assisted living facility David had mentioned casually several times. He'd highlighted the costs. $800 per month for a basic room, $200 for their premium care option. There were notes in the margins in David's handwriting. Mom's Social Security plus pension equals $200/month. Shortfall covered by house sale proceeds. He'd done the math. He'd calculated exactly how much of my money he'd need to keep me warehoused somewhere, while he profited from selling my home. The folder contained printouts of other assisted living facilities, all with cost comparisons. There was a checklist titled Transition Planning, with items like research mom's Medicare benefits, inventory valuable items in house, and determine minimum care level needed. But the document that broke my heart was a handwritten letter draft. Apparently something David had written but never sent. It was addressed to Caroline, my daughter in Seattle. Caroline, it began, I know you're going to have concerns about mom moving to assisted living, but I need you to understand the reality of the situation. She's 73 years old and living alone in a big house that's becoming too much for her to handle. I've been watching her closely, and I can see the signs of decline. She's more forgetful than she used to be, she's not maintaining the house like she should, and frankly, it's only a matter of time before something happens. A fall, a medical emergency, or worse. The house is worth nearly $0,000,000. And that money could ensure mom gets excellent care for the rest of her life. If we wait too long, we risk her health declining to the point where she can't make rational decisions about her care, or worse, something catastrophic happens and we're forced to make emergency decisions. I've found a really nice facility that specializes in active seniors. It's not a nursing home. It's more like a retirement community. Mom would have her own apartment, meals provided, activities, and medical care on site. She'd probably make friends and be happier than she is rattling around in that big empty house. I know this is hard to think about, but we have to be practical. The house needs significant work, the roof, the heating system, probably the plumbing. Those are expensive repairs that will only get worse. If we act now, we can sell the house while it's still in decent shape, use the proceeds to secure mom's care, and maybe even have something left over for our own families. I'm not suggesting we abandon mom or stick her somewhere awful. I'm suggesting we be proactive about ensuring she gets the care she needs while preserving her assets for her benefit. The alternative is waiting until crisis forces our hand, and that never ends well. Think about your own future too. You've got college tuition coming up for the kids, and I'm dealing with divorce expenses. We can't afford to support mom financially if her money gets eaten up by house repairs and medical emergencies. Let me know your thoughts. I think we should present this as a family decision, but the reality is that I'm the one here dealing with the day-to-day concerns, so I hope you'll trust my judgment on this. The letter was never sent, but it revealed everything about David's mindset. He'd been building a case against me, collecting evidence of my supposed decline, calculating the financial benefits of displacing me, and preparing to manipulate both me and his sister into going along with his plan. But there was more in that folder. So much more. There were printed emails between David and Sarah, his soon-to-be ex-wife, discussing their financial situation. In one exchange, Sarah had written, "The lawyers are saying you might have to pay significant alimony since I gave up my career to raise the kids. Plus child support. Have you thought about liquidating some assets?" David's response was chilling. "I'm working on accessing some family assets that should resolve our financial issues. Give me a few more months to put things in motion." Family assets. He was talking about my house like it already belonged to him. There were more emails, these between David and someone named Rick Morrison, who appeared to be a real estate investor. Rick was advising David on the renovation strategy, suggesting which improvements would provide the best return on investment. "The key is to modernize without losing the classic character," Rick had written. "These old colonials are gold mines if you do the renovation right. Your mom's place has great bones, and the location is perfect. You're looking at minimum 30% return on the renovation investment, probably closer to 40%. David had responded. "Timeline is the main concern. I need to get mom settled somewhere and start the work as soon as possible. The divorce is eating up my savings, and I need this to work out quickly." There were more documents, research on legal guardianship procedures, information about power of attorney rights, even a printout about something called therapeutic fibbing, for convincing elderly parents to accept care transitions. My son hadn't just been planning to move me to a nursing home. He'd been researching the most effective ways to manipulate me into agreeing to it. I sat in that chair for nearly 2 hours reading through every document in that folder. By the time I'd finished, I understood that David's increased concern for my welfare, his helpful presence around the house, his gentle suggestions about planning for my future, all of it had been part of a calculated strategy to convince me to give up my independence so he could profit from my home. But the worst part wasn't the money, though the betrayal of my trust hurt deeply. The worst part was reading David's assessment of me in his notes and letters. According to his observations, I was declining, forgetful, unable to properly maintain my home, and headed toward incompetence. These weren't true, but I realized David had been looking for evidence to support his narrative. When I'd forgotten where I put my reading glasses, David noted it. When I'd mentioned that the house felt too big sometimes, he'd interpreted it as me being overwhelmed by homeownership. When I'd asked him to help with a plumbing issue I couldn't handle myself, he'd seen it as proof of my diminishing capabilities. My son had been building a case against my competence while pretending to care for my welfare. I closed the folder and sat in the growing darkness of Robert's study. David would be home from work soon, and he'd expect me to greet him with a smile, maybe offer him dinner, ask about his day. He'd expect me to be the grateful aging mother who appreciated his devoted attention. But everything had changed. I couldn't unsee what I'd seen, couldn't unknow what I now knew. My son was planning to steal my life from me, and he was going to make me thank him for it. That's when I started planning my own strategy. I spent the evening acting normally. When David came home around 8 o'clock, I was in the kitchen making tea. "Hi, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. "Were you able to get the printer working?" "Oh, I'm sorry," I said. "I couldn't find the manual anywhere. Maybe we should just buy you a new printer." "That's okay," he said. "I'll look for the manual myself tomorrow. Thanks for trying." He seemed tired, stressed about something, and I found myself studying his face for signs of the deception I now knew he was capable of. How long had he been lying to me? How long had he been seeing me as nothing more than an obstacle to his financial security? "How was your day?" I asked, pouring him a cup of tea. "Oh, same old stuff. The divorce lawyers are being difficult, work is crazy, the usual." He sat down at the kitchen table. "Actually, Mom, I've been thinking about something, and I wanted to run it by you." My heart rate quickened. Was this it? Was he finally going to make his pitch? "Sarah's lawyer is pushing for a bigger settlement than we originally discussed," he continued. "It's going to put me in a real financial bind. I'm trying to figure out how to manage everything." I waited, letting him continue. "The thing is, I've been worrying about you too. This house is a lot for you to manage, and with me going through the divorce, I'm not going to be able to help out as much as I have been." Here it comes, I thought. "I was wondering if you'd be open to looking at some of those senior living communities we talked about." "Not immediately," he added quickly, "but maybe just to see what's out there. For future planning." Future planning. That phrase again. "I don't know, David," I said carefully. "I'm pretty comfortable here." "I know you are, Mom. And I'm not trying to rush you into anything. It's just that I want to make sure you're safe and well cared for. Especially if I'm not going to be as available to help out." The manipulation was so smooth, so caring on the surface. He was making his abandonment of me sound like concern for my welfare. "Let me think about it," I said. "Of course," he said, patting my hand. "There's no hurry. I just want you to know that whatever you need, we'll figure it out together." Together. Right. After David left that night, I sat in my living room and made some decisions. My son thought I was a declining old woman who could be manipulated into giving up everything I'd worked for. He thought I was too naive to see through his caring facade, too grateful for his attention to question his motives. He was wrong. I've lived 73 years, survived the death of my husband, raised 2 children, and managed my own affairs quite competently, thank you very much. I'm not the helpless old woman David apparently thinks I am. And I'm certainly not going to let him ship me off to a nursing home so he can profit from selling my house. But I also wasn't going to confront him directly. David had been planning his strategy for months, maybe years. A direct confrontation would just put him on the defensive and force him to accelerate his timeline. Instead, I was going to beat him at his own game. The next morning, I called my lawyer. James Mitchell had been my attorney for over 20 years. He'd handled Robert's will, helped us with various property matters, and managed the legal aspects of Robert's estate after he died. More importantly, James was someone I trusted completely. "Martha," he said when I called, "it's so good to hear from you. How are you doing?" "I'm doing well, James, but I need some advice about something rather sensitive." "Of course. Why don't you come in this afternoon? I have time around 2 o'clock. I spent the morning thinking about what I was going to say, how much I was going to reveal. By the time I walked into James's office that afternoon, I had decided to tell him everything. James listened without interruption as I described finding David's folder, reading through his plans, and understanding the scope of his deception. When I finished, James was quiet for a long moment. "Martha," he said finally, "I'm so sorry. This must be incredibly painful for you." "It is," I admitted. "But I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here because I want to make sure David can't do what he's planning to do." "Well, the good news is that he can't force you to sell your house or move to assisted living, as long as you're competent to make your own decisions. And from what I can see, you're clearly competent. But what if he tries to have me declared incompetent?" I saw research about guardianship procedures in his folder. James's expression grew serious. "That's a more complicated issue. If David petitioned the court for guardianship, there would be a hearing. You'd be evaluated by medical professionals, and the court would determine whether you're capable of managing your own affairs. And if they decided I wasn't, then David, as your closest local relative, would likely be appointed as your guardian, which would give him legal authority to make decisions about your care and your assets." The thought made me sick. How can I protect myself from that? "Several ways," James said. "First, we can update your power of attorney documents to specify exactly who you want making decisions for you if you ever become incapacitated. Currently, Your power of attorney probably defaults to your children, with David as the primary since he's local. What are my other options? You could name me as your power of attorney for financial matters and designate someone else for healthcare decisions. Or you could choose Caroline, your daughter in Seattle. The key is to make your wishes legally clear before any question of competency arises. What else? We can also set up what's called a revocable trust. You'd transfer ownership of your house and other major assets to the trust, with yourself as the trustee. You'd maintain complete control over your assets, but if something happened to you, the trust would specify exactly how your assets should be handled. David couldn't override the trust's instructions even if he became your guardian. This sounded promising. How quickly can we set this up? We can have the basic documents drafted within a week. But Martha, there's something else you should consider. What's that? David's behavior suggests he may be in serious financial trouble. People don't usually go to these lengths unless they're desperate. If you block his access to your assets, he might escalate his efforts to have you declared incompetent, or he might try other approaches. Like what? I don't want to alarm you unnecessarily, but you should be prepared for the possibility that David might try to manufacture evidence of your declining competence. He might start documenting incidents, maybe even creating situations where you appear confused or unable to care for yourself. The thought chilled me. You mean he might sabotage me? I'm just saying you should be careful. Keep your own documentation of your activities, your medical appointments, your daily functioning. If David ever does petition for guardianship, you'll want evidence that you're managing your life perfectly well. I left James's office with a plan and a timeline. We'd draft new power of attorney documents naming James as my financial agent and Caroline as my healthcare agent. We'd set up a revocable trust that would protect my house and other assets from any future manipulation. And I'd start keeping my own records of my daily activities and competence. But I also left with a new understanding of how serious David's betrayal really was. This wasn't just about money. He was prepared to have me declared mentally incompetent if necessary to access my assets. He was willing to destroy my reputation and my independence to solve his financial problems. Over the next few days, I began to see David's behavior with new eyes. He continued his routine of stopping by every evening, continued asking about my day, my activities, my well-being. But now I noticed how he seemed to be probing for information. How did you sleep last night, Mom? You look a little tired. Did you remember to take your medications this morning? Mrs. Patterson mentioned she saw you looking confused at the grocery store yesterday. Is everything okay? I hadn't been confused at the grocery store. I'd been looking for a specific brand of cereal that they'd moved to a different aisle. But David was apparently collecting reports from neighbors about my supposed confusion. I'm fine, I told him. Just couldn't find something they'd moved. Oh good, he said, but I saw him make a note in his phone. 2 days later, David brought up the subject of my driving. Mom, I've been thinking about your car. When's the last time you had your vision tested? My vision is fine, David. I know. It's just that Peterson mentioned that people our age should have annual eye exams, and I couldn't remember when you'd last had one. Our age? David was 42. I was 73. But I realized he was trying to group us together, make it sound like we were both facing age-related challenges. I had an eye exam 6 months ago, I told him. My vision is 20/25, which is better than yours. Of course, he said quickly. I just worry about you driving alone, especially at night. I'd been driving for 55 years without incident. But David was apparently building a case that I was becoming unsafe behind the wheel. The next day he asked about my finances. Mom, are you keeping up with your bills okay? I know managing finances can get complicated. I've been managing my finances for decades, David. They're not complicated. I know you have. It's just that I've been helping Mrs. Chan next door with her bills, and she said it's gotten harder to keep track of everything. I thought maybe I could help you organize your system, make it easier. I realized David was fishing for access to my financial information, probably trying to find evidence of confusion or mismanagement that he could use later. My system works fine for me, I said firmly, but these conversations made me understand that James had been right. David was actively collecting evidence to support a future competency challenge. Every interaction was potentially being used to build his case against me. That's when I decided to start documenting everything myself. I bought a small notebook and began recording our conversations, David's visits, his questions and comments. I started keeping receipts for everything I purchased, maintaining detailed records of my daily activities, and even asking my doctor to note in my file that I'd specifically requested confirmation of my mental competence. Dr. Sarah Peterson had been my physician for 12 years. When I explained the situation during my next appointment, she was appalled. "Martha, I've seen you every few months for years. There's absolutely nothing wrong with your mental acuity. In fact, you're sharper than most people half your age. Would you be willing to document that in my medical file?" "Absolutely. I'll note that you requested a mental status evaluation and that you pass with flying colors. I'll also document your concerns about potential future challenges to your competency." Dr. Peterson also agreed to write a letter for my attorney stating that I was fully competent to make my own medical and financial decisions. Meanwhile, James was moving quickly on the legal protections. Within a week, I had new power of attorney documents that specifically named him as my financial agent and Caroline as my healthcare agent. The documents included language stating that these appointments were made while I was fully competent, and that I did not want David involved in my financial or medical decisions. Setting up the trust took a bit longer, but James expedited the process. Within 2 weeks, my house and major assets were transferred to the Martha Caldwell Revocable Trust, with me as the sole trustee and beneficiary. The trust specified that upon my death, Caroline would inherit the house, and David would receive a cash bequest equal to half the house's value at the time of my death. "This protects your house from being sold while you're alive," James explained. "But it's still fair to both your children ultimately. What if David challenges the trust?" "He can try, but trusts are much harder to challenge than wills. As long as you were competent when you created it, which you clearly were, and as long as there's no evidence of coercion or fraud, the trust will stand." I felt more secure with these legal protections in place, but I still hadn't decided what to do about David himself. Part of me wanted to confront him directly, to let him know that I'd discovered his plans and taken steps to protect myself. But another part of me was curious to see how far he'd go with his deception. The answer came sooner than I expected. 3 weeks after I'd found David's folder, he came to visit with what he called some exciting news. "Mom, I've been doing some research and I found this amazing place I think you should see." He handed me a glossy brochure for Sunset Manor, the same assisted living facility I'd seen in his secret folder. "It's not a nursing home," he said quickly. "It's more like a retirement resort. They have a beautiful dining room, activities, even a library. And the best part is they have medical staff on site, so you'd never have to worry about emergencies." I looked through the brochure, noting the highlighted sections that matched the research in David's folder. "This looks expensive," I said. "Well, that's the thing. I've been running some numbers, and with your Social Security and Dad's pension, plus maybe using some of the equity in this house, we could make it work." There it was. The pitch I'd been expecting. Use the equity in the house? Well, yes. The thing is, Mom, this house is worth a lot of money, but it's not doing you any good just sitting here. If we sold it, the proceeds could pay for your care at a place like Sunset Manor for many years. But then where would I live while I'm waiting to get into this place? "Oh, they have availability right now," David said quickly. "I already called and asked. You could move in within a month." He'd already called. Of course he had. "I don't know, David. This is all very sudden." "I know it seems sudden, but Mom, I've been watching you and I'm getting worried. You seem more forgetful lately, and this house is getting to be too much for you." "I don't feel like it's too much. I know you don't want to admit it, but I've noticed things. Like last week when you couldn't find your glasses, or when you seemed confused about which day your doctor's appointment was." These were the incidents David had been documenting, the evidence he was collecting. But they were normal, everyday occurrences that he was interpreting as signs of decline. "Everyone misplaces their glasses sometimes," I said. "Of course they do. But Mom, you're 73. It's normal for things to get harder as we age. There's no shame in getting help." The conversation continued for another hour, with David gently but persistently making his case for why I should sell my house and move to assisted living. He was smooth, caring, and completely convincing, If I hadn't known what I knew. Finally, I told him I'd think about it. That's all I ask, he said. Maybe we could visit Sunset Manor together this weekend? Just to see what it's like. Maybe, I said. After David left, I called Caroline. My daughter and I had always been close, but with her living across the country and raising her own family, we didn't talk as often as we should. When I told her about David's suggestion that I sell the house and move to assisted living, she was immediately concerned. Mom, are you having trouble managing the house? You've never mentioned anything to me. I'm not having any trouble, I said. But David seems to think I am. What kind of trouble is he talking about? I decided to tell Caroline everything. About finding David's folder, about his secret plans, about the timeline for shipping me off to a nursing home so he could renovate and sell my house. Caroline was silent for a long time after I finished. Mom, she said finally, I can't believe David would do something like this. I have copies of all the documents, I said. I can email them to you if you want to see for yourself. Yes, please do that. And Mom? Don't sign anything, don't agree to visit any facilities, don't make any decisions until I can get out there. When can you come? I'm booking a flight right now. I'll be there this weekend. That Friday, Caroline arrived. She'd taken the red-eye from Seattle and looked exhausted, but she was determined to see David's folder for herself. I showed her copies of everything, the real estate evaluation, the renovation plans, the timeline, the draft letter David had written to her, the emails about family assets. Caroline's reaction was even stronger than mine had been. This is unbelievable, she said, staring at the architectural plans that eliminated any space for me in my own house. He's been planning this for months. Maybe longer, I said. And he was going to manipulate me into going along with it, she said, reading his draft letter. Listen to this. I can see the signs of decline. What signs? You seem fine to me. That's because I am fine. David's been looking for evidence that doesn't exist. Caroline spent the weekend with me, observing my daily routines, my interactions with neighbors, my general functioning. By Sunday, she was furious. Mom, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. You're sharp, you're independent, you're managing everything perfectly well. David is either delusional or deliberately lying. I think he's desperate, I said. The divorce is expensive, and he sees my house as the solution to his financial problems. Well, he's not getting it, Caroline said firmly. Not like this. That Sunday evening, David came by for his usual visit. He was surprised to see Caroline. Caroline, I didn't know you were coming to visit. It was last minute, she said coolly. Mom told me about your suggestion that she sell the house and move to assisted living. I watched David's face carefully as Caroline spoke. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how much I'd told her. Oh, that. Well, I'm just trying to help Mom think through her options for the future. What makes you think she needs to consider those options right now? Well, as I was telling Mom, I've been noticing some signs that this house might be getting to be too much for her. Really? What signs? David glanced at me, probably wondering if I'd mentioned his documentation efforts. Just little things. Memory issues, confusion, difficulty with maintenance tasks. Caroline said. That's interesting because I've been here for 3 days and I haven't seen any of those signs. Well, you don't see Mom every day like I do. No, I don't. But I've been watching carefully, and Mom seems perfectly capable of managing her life and her house. David's expression grew defensive. Look, Caroline, I know you mean well, but you don't live here. You don't see the day-to-day challenges Mom faces. You're right, Caroline said. I don't live here. But I'm going to start visiting more often to see these challenges for myself. David didn't like that answer. I could see him realizing that his timeline might be in jeopardy if Caroline started paying closer attention. Of course, he said. More family visits are always good. But Caroline, we can't wait forever to address Mom's changing needs. These things tend to progress quickly once they start. What things? Caroline asked pointedly. The normal aging process. Cognitive decline, physical limitations, the inability to live independently safely. And you think Mom is experiencing these things? I think Mom is starting to experience them, yes. Caroline looked at me, then back at David. Well, I think we should get a professional opinion before making any major decisions. What do you mean? I mean, maybe Mom should have a comprehensive medical evaluation. If there are really signs of decline, her doctor should document them. I saw panic flash across David's face. A medical evaluation would show that I was perfectly competent, which would undermine his entire narrative. I don't think that's necessary, he said quickly. Mom sees Dr. Peterson regularly, and she's never mentioned any concerns. Then Dr. Peterson should be able to provide documentation of Mom's competence, Caroline said smoothly. Well, yes, I suppose she could. Good. Then we'll start there before considering any major life changes. David left earlier than usual that night, clearly frustrated that his plan was being challenged. After he was gone, Caroline and I talked about strategy. I think you should confront him directly, Caroline said. Let him know that you found his folder, and that you're not going along with his plan. Part of me wants to, I said. But another part of me is curious to see how far he'll push this. What do you mean? I mean, now that he knows you're going to be watching more closely, and now that he realizes I'm not going to just go along with his suggestions, what's he going to do next? Caroline considered this. You think he might escalate? I think he might try to manufacture evidence of my incompetence. That's a serious accusation, Mom. It's a serious situation. David is facing financial ruin from his divorce, and he sees my house as his salvation. People do desperate things when they're desperate. Caroline agreed to extend her visit by a few days to observe David's behavior. She also agreed to start visiting more regularly to keep an eye on the situation. But we didn't have to wait long to see David's next move. The following Tuesday, David showed up at my house in the middle of the day with a woman I didn't recognize. Mom, this is Janet Peterson from Sunset Manor. I asked her to come by and meet you. Janet was a cheerful woman in her 50s who immediately began talking about the wonderful amenities at Sunset Manor, the caring staff, the vibrant community of active seniors. Your son tells me you might be interested in learning more about our community, she said. I'm still thinking about it, I said carefully. Of course. It's a big decision. But I have to say, your son seems very concerned about your welfare. It's wonderful to see such a devoted child. David beamed at this praise, playing the role of the caring son perfectly. Janet spent an hour showing me brochures, talking about services, and answering questions I didn't really have. Throughout the visit, David kept interjecting comments about his concerns for my safety and well-being. I just worry about Mom being here alone, he told Janet. Especially at night. What if something happened? That's exactly why families choose our community, Janet said. We have 24-hour medical staff, emergency response systems in every apartment, and a caring community that looks out for each other. After Janet left, David stayed to continue the conversation. What did you think of her, Mom? Doesn't Sunset Manor sound wonderful? It sounds very nice for people who need that level of care. But Mom, I think you do need that level of care. Maybe not right now, but soon. And it's better to make these transitions while you're still healthy, rather than waiting for a crisis. What kind of crisis are you expecting, David? I don't know. A fall, a medical emergency, cognitive changes. These things can happen suddenly at your age. My age, I repeated. You keep talking about my age like it's a disability. It's not a disability, Mom. It's just a reality. We all age, and aging brings challenges. What challenges am I facing right now? David paused, clearly trying to come up with specific examples. Well, you've been more forgetful lately. Everyone is forgetful sometimes. And you've seemed confused about things. What things? Like last week when you couldn't remember what day your dentist appointment was. This was interesting. I hadn't had a dentist appointment last week. I didn't have a dentist appointment last week. David looked flustered. Oh, maybe it was the week before. Or maybe it was a different appointment. I don't think I've seemed confused about any appointments. Well, maybe I'm remembering wrong. But Mom, the point is that I've been watching you closely, and I can see changes. What kind of changes? You move more slowly than you used to. You seem more tired. You don't maintain the house like you used to. None of these things were true, and I realized David was just throwing out generic signs of aging to see what would stick. David, I said quietly, Are you trying to convince me that I'm declining? I'm trying to help you see that it might be time to think about your future needs. And you think my future needs include selling my house and moving to a nursing home? It's not a nursing home, Mom. It's an assisted living community. Same result, though. I lose my home, and you get access to the proceeds from selling it. David's face flushed. This isn't about money, Mom. This is about your safety and well-being. Is it? We stared at each other for a long moment. I could see David trying to decide whether I was just being resistant or whether I suspected something more. Of course it is, he said finally. You're my mother. I love you. I want what's best for you. After David left, I called Caroline and told her about the visit from Janet Peterson. He brought a salesperson to your house? Without asking first. He's accelerating his timeline. This is getting out of hand, Mom. I think you need to confront him. Not yet, I said. I want to see what he does next. I didn't have to wait long. The next day, David called me around noon. Mom, I just got a call from Mrs. Patterson next door. She said she saw you wandering around your backyard in your nightgown this morning. She was concerned that you seemed confused. Mrs. Patterson was my neighbor of 15 years. I'd been weeding my garden that morning, wearing old clothes that might have looked like pajamas from a distance, but I certainly hadn't been wandering or confused. I was gardening, I told David. In your nightgown? In old clothes. I was weeding the flower beds. Oh, David said, sounding disappointed. Well, Mrs. Patterson was concerned. I decided to call Mrs. Patterson myself to see what she'd actually told David. Martha, she said when she answered. How are you, dear? I'm fine, Eleanor. David said you called him about seeing me in my backyard this morning. Called him? I didn't call David. Why would I call David? He said you were concerned because I seemed confused. Confused? You were gardening. I waved to you and you waved back. You seemed perfectly normal to me. So David had lied about Mrs. Patterson calling him. He was fabricating incidents to support his narrative of my decline. Eleanor, I said. Has David talked to you recently about my mental state or my ability to live independently? There was a pause. Well, now that you mention it, he did stop by a few weeks ago. He said he was worried about you living alone, and asked if I'd noticed any changes in your behavior. What did you tell him? I told him you seemed fine to me. Sharp as ever. Why? Is something wrong? David is trying to convince me to sell my house and move to assisted living. He seems to be looking for evidence that I'm not capable of living independently. That's ridiculous. You're one of the most capable people I know. Last month you helped me figure out how to use my new computer. Remember? I did remember. I also remembered that David had asked me what I'd been doing at Mrs. Patterson's house, and had seemed annoyed when I told him I'd been helping her with technology. Eleanor, if David asks you any more questions about my behavior, would you mind letting me know? Of course, dear. Is there something serious going on? I think David is in financial trouble and sees my house as a solution to his problems. Oh my, that's terrible. Your own son. I'm afraid so. That evening, David came by with more concerns. Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I'm really worried about you. Maybe we should make an appointment with Dr. Peterson to discuss your living situation. Why would we need to discuss my living situation with my doctor? Well, she might have insights about whether independent living is still appropriate for you. This was exactly what James had warned me about. David was trying to get medical documentation that would support his case. I just saw Dr. Peterson 2 weeks ago for my regular checkup. She said I'm in excellent health. Physical health, yes. But what about cognitive assessment? Are you saying you think there's something wrong with my mind? I'm saying that it might be worth getting a professional evaluation, just to establish a baseline. A baseline for what? For future comparisons when David tried to have me declared incompetent? David, I said, do you think I'm mentally competent right now? He hesitated. Of course I do, Mom. I just think it would be good to have that officially documented. Why? For planning purposes. There was that phrase again. What kind of planning? Well, if we're going to be making decisions about your future care, It would be helpful to have medical documentation of your current status. He kept saying we as if these were decisions we'd be making together. But I knew from his folder that David was planning to make these decisions for me, not with me. I'm not ready to make any decisions about future care, I said. I understand that, Mom. But it's better to plan ahead, while you're still able to participate in the planning. Still able to participate. The implication was clear. David expected that I wouldn't be able to participate in decisions much longer. That night I called James. Martha, I think it's time to confront David directly, he said after I told him about the recent escalations. He's clearly building towards something, and it's better to address it before he takes any legal action. What kind of legal action? He might petition for guardianship, or he might try to have you declared incompetent to make medical decisions. If he can get any medical professional to express concerns about your cognitive status, he could use that as grounds for intervention. But Dr. Peterson just documented that I'm competent. That's good, but David might try to find other professionals who don't know you as well. Sometimes people can be influenced by a concerned family member's assessment of the situation. I realized James was right. David's behavior was escalating, and I couldn't just wait to see what he'd do next. It was time to take action. The next day, I called David and asked him to come over that evening. Of course, Mom. Is everything okay? We need to have a serious conversation. When David arrived, I had copies of his entire future planning folder laid out on the kitchen table. David walked into the kitchen and stopped dead when he saw the papers. Sit down, I said calmly. He sat, staring at the documents, clearly trying to figure out how to handle the situation. I found these in your filing cabinet when I was looking for the printer manual, I said. Mom, I can explain. Please do. David took a deep breath. I know this looks bad, but everything I've been doing is for your benefit. My benefit? Yes. I've been researching options for your future care because I love you and I want to make sure you're protected. Protected from what? From the challenges of aging. From being alone and vulnerable. From making decisions you might regret later. So you decided to make those decisions for me? I decided to research options so that when the time comes, we'll know what's available. I picked up the timeline from his folder. According to this, the time is supposed to come next month. Phase 1. Mom transitions to Sunset Manor. David's face flushed. That was just a preliminary timeline. Nothing set in stone. And Phase 3 list house for sale. Phase 4. Closing and profit distribution. Mom, you have to understand. I'm in a terrible financial situation. The divorce is destroying me financially, and I'm desperate. But that doesn't mean I don't have your best interests at heart. My best interests? Yes. That money from selling the house would ensure you get excellent care for the rest of your life. You'd be secure, comfortable, safe. And you'd make $400,000 to $500,000 profit. After paying for your care, yes. But Mom, that money would also secure my children's futures. Your grandchildren. Isn't that important to you? Of course my grandchildren are important to me. But David, this house is my home. My life. My independence. I know it is. But you can't live here forever. Eventually you'll need help, need care, need support that this house can't provide. Maybe. But not now. And not because you need money. It's not just because I need money. Isn't it? David was quiet for a moment, staring at the papers on the table. Okay, he said finally. Yes, I need the money. Desperately. But Mom, even if I didn't need the money, this would still be the right decision for you. Would it? Yes. You're 73 years old. You live alone in a big house. Every day you're at risk of falling, having a medical emergency, or experiencing cognitive decline. At Sunset Manor you'd be safe. Safe and institutionalized. Safe and cared for. By strangers in a place that's not my home. But Mom, this house isn't just your home anymore. It's also a liability. It's expensive to maintain, difficult to secure. And if something happens to you here, no one might know for hours. I have neighbors. I have friends. I have a life here. You have a limited life here. At Sunset Manor you'd have activities, social opportunities, people your own age to spend time with. I don't want people my own age. I want my own life in my own home. David leaned back in his chair, looking frustrated. Mom, I'm trying to help you understand that this isn't really about what you want anymore. It's about what you need. And you've decided what I need? I've researched what you need. I've looked at the statistics, the risks, the realities of aging in place. The realities according to who? According to medical professionals, social workers, geriatric specialists. Have you talked to my doctor about my specific situation? I've talked to professionals about the general situation of 73-year-old women living alone. But not about me specifically. No, but the principles are the same. I stood up and walked to the kitchen counter where I'd placed Dr. Peterson's letter. This is a letter from Dr. Peterson, I said, handing it to David. She examined me last week specifically to assess my mental competence and my ability to live independently. David read the letter, his face growing more troubled with each sentence. According to my doctor, I continued, I am fully competent to make my own decisions, physically capable of living independently, and showing no signs of cognitive decline or functional impairment. Mom, one doctor's opinion. One doctor who knows me, who has treated me for 12 years, who has observed my functioning over time. As opposed to your research about generic 73-year-old women. David set the letter down on the table. Look, Mom, even if you're fine now, these things can change quickly. Wouldn't it be better to make the transition while you're healthy rather than waiting for a crisis? No, David. It would not be better. It would be better to live my life in my own home, until and unless I choose to make a change. But what if you're not able to make that choice when the time comes? Then Caroline will help me make it. Or James Mitchell will help me make it. I've updated my power of attorney to reflect my wishes. David's eyes widened. You changed your power of attorney? Yes. James Mitchell is now my financial agent, and Caroline is my healthcare agent. But Mom, I'm your local son. I'm the one who's been taking care of you. You're the one who's been planning to institutionalize me so you can sell my house. That's not fair. Isn't it? David, I found emails between you and your wife discussing liquidating family assets. I found your correspondence with real estate investors about renovation strategies. I found your timeline for getting me settled somewhere, so you could start construction. David was quiet, staring at his hands. I also found your draft letter to Caroline, explaining how you were going to convince her that this was all for my benefit. Mom, I'm desperate. I'm facing financial ruin. My ex-wife is going to take everything, and I won't be able to support my children. So you decided to take everything from me instead? It's not taking. You'd still benefit from the sale of the house. David, this house isn't just an asset to me. It's my home. It's where I lived with your father for 30 years. It's where I raised you and Caroline. It's where all my memories live. I know that, Mom. But memories don't provide security or care in old age. And neither does being forced out of my home by my own son. We sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, David looked up at me. So what happens now? Now you stop trying to convince me that I need to sell my house and move to a nursing home. What about my financial situation? That's your problem to solve, not mine. But Mom, you could help me. You could choose to help me. I could. But I'm not going to be manipulated or coerced into helping you. What if I asked you directly? What if I explained my situation and asked for your help without any deception? I considered this. What kind of help are you asking for? A loan. Something to help me get through the divorce and get back on my feet. How much? I don't know. Maybe 50,000? 100,000. And if I said no? Then I'd respect your decision. Would you? Or would you go back to trying to have me declared incompetent so you could access my assets anyway? David looked shocked. I would never do that. David, you researched guardianship procedures. You looked into the process for having someone declared mentally incompetent. That was just research. I wanted to understand all the options. The options for overriding my decisions if I didn't cooperate with your plan. That's not. I wasn't planning. What were you planning? David was quiet for a long time. I was planning to help you see that moving to assisted living was in your best interest, he said finally. And if you couldn't see that, then maybe you needed help making decisions. Help from you. Help from someone who loves you and wants what's best for you. David, what's best for me is to remain independent in my own home for as long as I'm able. What's best for you is to sell my house and use the proceeds to solve your financial problems. These two things are not compatible. They could be compatible if you chose to prioritize family over property. I am prioritizing family. I'm prioritizing my own well-being over your financial convenience. David stood up from the table. So that's it? You're going to let me lose everything rather than sell a house you don't really need. I'm going to keep my home rather than sacrifice my independence to solve your financial problems. Fine, David said, his caring facade finally dropping completely. But don't expect me to keep taking care of you. If you want to be independent, then be independent. I will be. And when something happens to you, when you fall or get sick or can't manage anymore, don't call me for help. I won't need to. I have other people I can call. David looked hurt and angry. Other people who aren't your son. Other people who respect my autonomy and don't see my home as their inheritance. It is our inheritance, Mom. Mine and Caroline's. When I die, yes. Not while I'm alive. David gathered up the papers from his folder and stuffed them into his briefcase. This isn't over, he said as he headed for the door. Yes, it is. We'll see. After David left, I sat in my kitchen feeling emotionally drained but also strangely relieved. The deception was over. The manipulation was exposed. David and I both knew exactly where we stood. But I also knew David well enough to know that his threat, "This isn't over," wasn't just empty bluster. He was facing financial ruin, and he'd already shown he was willing to go to great lengths to access my assets. Losing his facade of caring concern might make him more dangerous, not less. I called James and told him about the confrontation. How did he react when you told him about the power of attorney changes? He was surprised and upset. He seemed to think that being my local son gave him some kind of automatic authority over my decisions. Legally, it doesn't. Especially not now that you've made your wishes clear in properly executed documents. But he said, this isn't over. What could he do now? He could still try to petition for guardianship, but it would be much harder now that you have recent medical documentation of your competence, and you've clearly expressed your wishes about who should make decisions for you if necessary. What else? He could try to challenge the power of attorney documents, claiming you were coerced or mentally incompetent when you signed them. But again, that would be difficult given Dr. Peterson's letter and the circumstances. James, I'm worried that David might try to manufacture some kind of crisis or emergency to justify intervention. What do you mean? I mean he might try to create a situation where I appear unable to care for myself, or where outside authorities become concerned about my welfare. James was quiet for a moment. Martha, that's a serious concern. If David called Adult Protective Services and made a report about your living conditions or mental state, they'd be required to investigate. Even if the report was false, they'd have no way of knowing it was false until they investigated. And during the investigation, if they had concerns about your safety, they could recommend emergency interventions. Like what? Like temporary placement in a care facility, while they assessed your situation. The thought terrified me. How can I protect myself from that? Documentation. Keep detailed records of your daily activities, your interactions with neighbors, your medical appointments. Make sure you have witnesses who can attest to your competence and your ability to live independently. What else? Stay in close contact with Caroline. If David makes any kind of official report about your welfare, having your daughter involved and aware of the situation will help. Should I tell Caroline about tonight's confrontation? Yes. And Martha? Be careful. People in desperate financial situations sometimes do desperate things. I called Caroline immediately and told her everything that had happened. I can't believe he actually said, "This isn't over," she said. That sounds like a threat. It felt like a threat. Mom, I think I should come back out there. At least until we see what David does next. You don't need to do that. I'm fine. But are you safe? That was a question I couldn't answer with certainty. Over the next few days, David didn't visit or call. The silence was almost more unsettling than his constant presence had been. I found myself wondering what he was planning, whether he was going to escalate the situation or simply accept defeat. I got my answer the following Monday. I was in my garden that morning, planting some new flowers I bought over the weekend, when a car pulled into my driveway. Two people got out, a middle-aged woman in a business suit and a younger man with a clipboard. "Mrs. Caldwell?" the woman asked as she approached. "Yes. I'm Janet Morrison from County Adult Protective Services, and this is Tom Bradley from our office. We've received a report of concern about your welfare, and we're here to conduct a welfare check." My heart sank. David had made good on his threat. "What kind of report?" I asked. "A family member contacted us expressing concerns about your ability to live safely in this home. They reported that you've been showing signs of confusion, memory problems, and difficulty maintaining your property." I looked at Tom Bradley, who was already taking notes about my appearance and behavior. "I'm not experiencing any of those problems," I said calmly. "We understand that you may feel that way," Janet said gently, "but sometimes people experiencing cognitive decline aren't aware of their limitations. Would you like to come inside so we can discuss this properly?" I asked. "Yes, thank you." I led them into my living room, which was clean, well organized, and clearly maintained by someone fully capable of caring for their environment. Janet looked around approvingly. "Your home is very clean and well kept." "Thank you." "Can you tell me about your daily routine?" she asked. I described my typical day: morning coffee and newspaper, household tasks, gardening, meal preparation, evening television or reading. I mentioned my regular medical appointments, my weekly grocery shopping, my social activities with neighbors and friends. "Do you drive yourself to these appointments and activities?" Tom asked. "Yes. I've been driving for 55 years without incident." "When was your last vision test?" 6 months ago. My vision is 20/25. Janet was taking notes. The report we received mentioned concerns about memory problems. "Have you noticed any issues with forgetting appointments, getting confused about dates or times, or misplacing important items?" "Everyone forgets things occasionally," I said, "but I use a calendar to keep track of appointments, and I haven't had any significant memory issues." "What about medication management? Do you take any prescription medications?" "Yes, I take medication for blood pressure and cholesterol. I use a pill organizer and have never missed doses or taken incorrect amounts." "Can you show me your medication setup?" I led them to my kitchen and showed them my pill organizer, which was clearly and correctly organized for the week. "Who helps you organize this?" Tom asked. "I organize it myself every Sunday evening." Janet made more notes. "Mrs. Caldwell, the family member who contacted us, was quite concerned. They mentioned that you've seemed confused during recent conversations, that you've had difficulty remembering recent events, and that you've been making poor decisions about your care." "What family member made this report?" "I can't share that information, but they seem genuinely worried about your welfare. I'd like to know who made these allegations so I can address them directly." "That's not possible under our confidentiality policies." Of course it wasn't. David could make anonymous accusations, and I couldn't even defend myself against them directly. "Can you tell me specifically what poor decisions I'm supposed to have made about my care?" Janet consulted her notes. "The report mentioned that you've been resistant to considering appropriate living arrangements for someone your age, and that you've been dismissive of family concerns about your safety." "I see. And what living arrangements does this family member think would be appropriate?" "Some form of assisted living or supervised care." "Based on what medical assessment?" "I'm sorry. What medical professional has assessed me and determined that I need assisted living or supervised care?" Janet looked uncomfortable. "The report didn't mention a medical assessment." "That's because there hasn't been one. In fact, my doctor recently evaluated me specifically to assess my competence and my ability to live independently, and found no problems." "You have documentation of that?" "Yes." I retrieved Dr. Peterson's letter and handed it to Janet. She read it carefully, then showed it to Tom. "This is very helpful," she said. "However, we still need to complete our assessment." They spent another hour with me, asking questions about my finances, my social connections, my emergency plans, my daily functioning. They toured my house, examined my kitchen and bathroom for safety issues, and observed my interactions and responses. Finally, Janet sat down with me in the living room. Mrs. Caldwell, based on our assessment, we don't see any immediate safety concerns or signs of cognitive impairment. Your home is well maintained, you're clearly managing your daily activities independently, and you have medical documentation of your competence. I felt a huge wave of relief. However, she continued, we do want to make some recommendations. What kind of recommendations? We'd suggest that you consider having more regular contact with family members or friends, perhaps arrange for periodic wellness checks, and think about putting some emergency plans in place in case you ever do need assistance. Those seem like reasonable suggestions. We'd also suggest that you consider the concerns raised by your family member. Even if their approach wasn't ideal, they may have legitimate worries about your long-term welfare. I understand their concerns, I said carefully, but I believe they're premature. After Janet and Tom left, I called James immediately. They found no problems with your competence or living situation? None. But James, the fact that David was willing to call Adult Protective Services on me shows how far he's prepared to go. It also shows that he's getting desperate. The APS investigation didn't produce the result he was hoping for. What if he tries something else? He might. But Martha, he's also exposed himself now. If he makes additional false reports, it will start to look like harassment rather than genuine concern. Should I report David for making a false report? Not yet. Let's see what happens next. But document everything: the APS visit, your interactions with the investigators, their findings. I will. That evening David called. Mom, I heard you had some visitors today. Yes, I did. How did that go? They found no problems with my competence or my living situation. There was a pause. Well, that's good. Is it? You don't sound pleased. Of course I'm pleased, Mom. I want you to be okay. David, did you call Adult Protective Services? Another pause. I may have expressed some concerns to people who could help. You made a false report about my mental state and my ability to live independently. I made a report based on my genuine concerns about your welfare. Concerns that were unfounded, as the investigation proved. Mom, I'm glad the investigation didn't find any immediate problems. But that doesn't mean my concerns aren't valid. Your concerns are about your financial situation, not my welfare. That's not true, isn't it? David, you called government authorities to try to have me removed from my home because I wouldn't voluntarily sell it to solve your money problems. I called them because I'm worried about you. You called them because your direct manipulation didn't work, so you decided to try official intervention. Mom, I'm trying to help you. No, David. You're trying to help yourself to my assets. I hung up the phone. The next few days were quiet, but I knew this wasn't over. David's call to APS had failed, but he was still facing the same financial pressures that had driven him to that extreme measure. I was right to be concerned. On Thursday, I had another unexpected visitor. This time it was my neighbor Eleanor Patterson, looking upset. Martha, I need to tell you about something strange that happened yesterday. What? David came by and asked me a bunch of questions about you. He wanted to know if I'd noticed any changes in your behavior, whether you'd seemed confused or forgetful, whether I'd seen you doing anything dangerous or unusual. What did you tell him? I told him you seemed fine to me, but Martha, he kept pushing. He asked about specific incidents, like whether I'd seen you leave your stove on, or go outside inappropriately dressed, or seem lost in your own neighborhood. Had you seen any of those things? Of course not. But he acted like he expected me to have stories about your behavior. He seemed disappointed when I didn't. Did he suggest that you might have missed signs of problems? Yes. He said that sometimes family members are better positioned to notice subtle changes, and that neighbors might not realize when someone is starting to decline. David was still collecting evidence, still trying to build his case for my incompetence. Eleanor, did David ask you to document any future incidents or concerns? He did. He gave me his phone number and asked me to call him if I noticed anything unusual about your behavior. And will you? Of course not. Martha, there's nothing unusual about your behavior, except that you're more independent and capable than most people half your age. I appreciate that. But I wanted you to know what David was doing. It felt wrong to me. After Eleanor left, I called several of my other neighbors. 3 of them had received similar visits from David in the past week. He was systematically trying to recruit witnesses to his narrative of my decline. But his approach was backfiring. Instead of finding concerned neighbors who supported his story, he was creating a group of people who were now aware of his agenda and suspicious of his motives. I decided it was time to be proactive rather than reactive. That weekend, I organized a small gathering at my house. I invited Eleanor and my other closest neighbors, along with Caroline, who flew out for the weekend, and James Mitchell. I want everyone to understand what's been happening, I told the group, and I want to ask for your help. I explained about David's financial troubles, his plans to sell my house, his attempts to have me declared incompetent or unsafe, and his recent efforts to recruit neighbors as witnesses against me. This is terrible, said my neighbor Bob Chen. David seemed so concerned about you when he came to talk to me. I thought he was being a devoted son. He's being a desperate son, Caroline said. And he's willing to destroy Mom's life to solve his financial problems. James explained the legal situation, how my new power of attorney documents and trust protected my assets, but how David might continue trying to undermine my competence or create situations that would justify intervention. What can we do to help? Asked Eleanor. Be aware of what's happening, I said. If David approaches you with more questions or asks you to document incidents, please let me know. And if any other officials come asking questions about my welfare, please be honest about what you've observed. We can do more than that, said Bob. We can document your daily activities ourselves. Show that you're active, engaged, and managing your life perfectly well. That's a great idea, James said. Independent witnesses who can attest to Martha's competence and daily functioning would be very valuable if this situation escalates further. We agreed on an informal system where my neighbors would make notes about their interactions with me. Conversations over the fence, times they saw me gardening or getting mail, occasions when I helped them or they helped me with normal neighborly activities. We're creating a record that shows you're an active, engaged member of this community, Eleanor said. Not someone who needs to be in a nursing home. After everyone left, Caroline and I talked about the next steps. Mom, I'm worried that David is going to keep escalating this until something bad happens. What do you think I should do? I think you should consider getting a restraining order. Against my own son? Against someone who has made false reports to government agencies, who is harassing your neighbors for information, and who has threatened that this isn't over. I considered this. Wouldn't that seem like an overreaction? Would it? Mom, David has already crossed major lines. He's lied to officials about your mental state. He's tried to manipulate you through fake concern, while secretly planning to institutionalize you. He's attempted to recruit neighbors to support false allegations about your competence. I know. And he's facing serious financial pressure with no other obvious solutions. People in desperate situations do desperate things. James said the same thing. Then maybe you should listen to us. I spent that night thinking about Caroline's suggestion. Part of me recoiled from the idea of getting a restraining order against David. He was still my son, and despite everything he'd done, I loved him. But another part of me recognized that love wasn't enough to protect me from someone who saw my independence as an obstacle to his financial survival. The decision was made for me the following Tuesday. I was in my kitchen making breakfast when I heard a key in my front door. David walked in without knocking, something he'd never done before. David, you scared me. Why didn't you knock? It's my key, Mom. I don't need to knock. His tone was different, harder, more aggressive than I'd ever heard from him. Actually, you do need to knock. This is my house. For now. What does that mean? It means I've been doing some more research, and I think you should know what I've learned. David sat down at my kitchen table without being invited. I talked to a lawyer about elder abuse, he said. Elder abuse? Yes. Did you know that financial elder abuse includes situations where elderly people are influenced to make decisions that aren't in their best interests? I stared at him. What are you talking about? I'm talking about you being influenced to change your power of attorney and set up trusts that benefit people who aren't family. I made those decisions myself, based on what I thought was best for me. Did you? Or were you influenced by people who have their own financial interests in your assets? David, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that James Mitchell stands to benefit financially from managing your affairs, and Caroline stands to benefit from inheriting your house instead of sharing it with me. That's ridiculous. Is it? James gets paid for being your financial agent. Caroline gets the house instead of having to split the proceeds with me. They both benefited from influencing you to cut me out of your affairs. I realized what David was doing. He was building a case that I'd been manipulated by other people, which would allow him to challenge my recent legal decisions. No one influenced me to do anything, I said firmly. I made those decisions because I discovered that you were planning to have me institutionalized, so you could sell my house. According to who? According to James, who benefits from being your agent. According to Caroline, who benefits from inheriting everything. According to the documents in your own folder. What documents? I don't have any documents about institutionalizing you. David was lying out right now. I have copies of everything, David. Copies of what? Some research I did about care options? Some preliminary thoughts about future planning? That's not the same as planning to institutionalize you. Your timeline said Phase 1. Mom transitions to Sunset Manor. That was one possible scenario I was considering, not a definitive plan. David was rewriting history, reimagining his clear intentions as innocent research. David, you had architectural plans for renovating my house. Plans that didn't include a bedroom for me. I was looking at potential improvements that could be made to increase the house's value for your benefit. For my benefit? Yes. If you ever did decide to sell, those improvements would maximize your return on investment. And the timeline that ended with profit distribution? That was about making sure you got maximum benefit from your assets. David had an answer for everything, a reinterpretation that made his deception sound like concern and his manipulation sound like financial planning. David, why are you here? I'm here because I'm concerned about the influences in your life. I think you've been manipulated into making decisions that aren't in your best interests. By whom? By James Mitchell, who now controls your finances. By Caroline, who now inherits your house. By neighbors who are encouraging you to stay in a situation that might not be safe for you long term. What would you like me to do about these supposed influences? I'd like you to reconsider your recent decisions. I'd like you to think about whether the people who encourage those decisions really have your best interests at heart. And if I don't reconsider, then I might have to take steps to protect you from financial abuse. What kind of steps? Legal steps. I've learned about procedures for protecting elderly people who are being taken advantage of by unscrupulous advisors or family members. David was threatening to report James and Caroline for elder abuse, the same accusation that could be made against him for his original manipulation. David, I want you to leave. I'm trying to help you, Mom. I want you to leave my house. This is still my family home too. No, it's not. It's my home, and I want you to leave. David stood up slowly. Fine. But Mom, I want you to think carefully about the situation you're in. You've cut off your local son who's been taking care of you, and you've put your affairs in the hands of people who profit from your decisions. David, give me your key. What? Give me your house key. You just demonstrated that you think you can walk into my house without permission. That's not acceptable. Mom, what if there's an emergency? What if you need help? I have other people I can call for help. People who don't love you like family does. People who don't see my house as their inheritance. David reluctantly handed over his key. This is a mistake, Mom. The mistake was trusting you with that key in the first place. After David left, I called James and told him about the conversation. He's threatening to report you and Caroline for elder abuse? That's what it sounded like. Martha, that's actually a good development. Good. Yes, because now David is clearly acting out of spite rather than concern. If he makes reports claiming that your lawyer and daughter are abusing you financially, while simultaneously trying to access your assets himself, it will be obvious what's really going on. But what if someone believes him? Any investigation will show that you made informed decisions with proper legal counsel to protect yourself from someone who was planning to manipulate you. The evidence supports your narrative, not his. James, I'm starting to think Caroline was right about the restraining order. I think Caroline was right too. David just escalated this to a new level by coming into your house uninvited and making threats about legal action. That afternoon, I called Caroline and told her about David's visit. Mom, that's it. We're filing for a restraining order today. Are you sure? I'm sure. David has moved from manipulation to intimidation. He's threatening you, he's making false reports about you, and he's now threatening to make false reports about me and James. What if it makes things worse? How could it make things worse? Mom, David walked into your house without permission and threatened to take legal action against you if you don't give him access to your assets. This is harassment and it needs to stop. That evening, James came to my house with restraining order paperwork. This will legally require David to stay away from you, your home, and your workplace, he explained. It will also prohibit him from contacting you directly or through third parties. What about family events? What if Caroline wants to have everyone together for holidays? We can include exceptions for supervised family gatherings if that's what you want. I think I do want that. He's threatening you, he's making false reports about you, and he's now threatening to make false reports about me and James. What if it makes things worse? How could it make things worse? Mom, David walked into your house without permission and threatened to take legal action against you if you don't give him access to your assets. This is harassment and it needs to stop. That evening, James came to my house with restraining order paperwork. This will legally require David to stay away from you, your home, and your workplace, he explained. It will also prohibit him from contacting you directly or through third parties. What about family events? What if Caroline wants to have everyone together for holidays? We can include exceptions for supervised family gatherings if that's what you want. I think I do want that. Despite everything, David is still my son and the father of my grandchildren. Of course. We filled out the paperwork detailing David's manipulation, his false reports to Adult Protective Services, his harassment of neighbors, and his most recent threats. The petition would be heard by a judge within a few days. Martha, you should also know that filing this restraining order might prompt David to accelerate whatever he's planning to do next. What do you mean? I mean, he might try to take some kind of action before the order is finalized, while he still legally can. What kind of action? I don't know. But people who are facing court orders that will limit their options sometimes try to act quickly to preserve those options. That night I barely slept. I kept listening for sounds, wondering if David might try to return to the house, wondering what he might do if he felt cornered by the legal system. I didn't have to wonder long. Despite everything, David is still my son and the father of my grandchildren. Of course. We filled out the paperwork detailing David's manipulation, his false reports to Adult Protective Services, his harassment of neighbors, and his most recent threats. The petition would be heard by a judge within a few days. Martha, you should also know that filing this restraining order might prompt David to accelerate whatever he's planning to do next. What do you mean? I mean, he might try to take some kind of action before the order is finalized, while he still legally can. What kind of action? I don't know. But people who are facing court orders that will limit their options sometimes try to act quickly to preserve those options. That night I barely slept. I kept listening for sounds, wondering if David might try to return to the house, wondering what he might do if he felt cornered by the legal system. I didn't have to wonder long. The next morning, I received a call from Dr. Peterson's office. Mrs. Caldwell, we've received a request from your son for copies of your medical records. He's claiming to be your healthcare proxy and says he needs the records to ensure you're receiving appropriate care. He's not my healthcare proxy, I said. Caroline is. That's what we have in our files too, but your son is quite insistent. He's demanding the records and threatening legal action if we don't provide them. Please don't provide him with anything. If he has questions about my care, he can discuss them with Caroline. Of course. We just wanted to let you know about his request. An hour later, my bank called with a similar report. David had contacted them claiming to be my financial power of attorney and demanding access to my account information. The next morning, I received a call from Dr. Peterson's office. Mrs. Caldwell, we've received a request from your son for copies of your medical records. He's claiming to be your healthcare proxy and says he needs the records to ensure you're receiving appropriate care. He's not my healthcare proxy, I said. Caroline is. That's what we have in our files too, but your son is quite insistent. He's demanding the records and threatening legal action if we don't provide them. Please don't provide him with anything. If he has questions about my care, he can discuss them with Caroline. Of course. We just wanted to let you know about his request. An hour later, my bank called with a similar report. David had contacted them claiming to be my financial power of attorney and demanding access to my account information. We told him that our records show James Mitchell as your financial agent, the bank manager said. But he's claiming that designation was made under duress and shouldn't be recognized. It wasn't made under duress. It was made to protect me from David. We understand. We're not releasing any information to him, but we wanted you to be aware of his requests. David was making a coordinated effort to access my medical and financial information, probably to build his case that I was being manipulated by others or to find evidence of decline that he could use against me. But he wasn't done. That afternoon, I received a visit from someone I didn't